It's very hard to say, yeah, every single user can do anything they want on this community, and we're not going to kick anyone off, or we're not going to take any kind of corrective action. If you post something in your space and you're not tagging someone in the post, I think that should be looked at differently than I'm going into your thread and I'm commenting profusely or commenting hateful things. How should we start thinking about these different interaction models in the context of content platform monopolies? We have not had a public discourse around that. We don't want to find ourselves in a position where online free speech is now considered a luxury as opposed to a right. There are a few interaction models that we see across these different types of content platforms. In the past, I've spoken about kind of the four mechanisms that content platforms have used to penalize producers and creators. Real quick, that would be banning a user outright, suspending a user, taking down a user's post, or shadow banning that post so it gets less visibility, right? So pretty much the four mechanisms. Twitter added a fifth by modifying the posts and kind of putting that informational box and then putting other content to show an opposing point of view directly on the post, right? They added the fifth, but usually there was four. So what are those kind of key interaction models as we think about, hey, what did this person do online, just like yelling fire in a movie theater? One of the most common is I posted a post, right? I didn't tag anyone in it, right? So I'm not specifically kind of targeting someone or harassing someone online. If you think about like you can tag someone in the post. I'm not leaving a comment on someone else's thread. And you kind of think some of these content platforms have said like this one, Parler, which just launched. Their slogan is, if you can scream it on the streets of New York City, then you can say it here in Parler. And now there's an article that recently came out and said Parler is also banning users it doesn't like, to kind of show the irony and or the hypocrisy with that statement. And so it's very hard to say, yeah, every single user can do anything they want on this community, and we're not going to kick anyone off, or we're not going to take any kind of corrective action. That's not what I'm saying, even for the content platforms like a Facebook or a Google/YouTube. If it's a private company and you're not a monopoly, like a Parler, Reddit, Twitter, you should have much more leeway to run your business as a private business that is a monopoly. It's when you cross over these thresholds, right? So if I'm posting a post and it's fake news, it's incorrect information. It could be defamation. It could be speaking inappropriately about some kind of topic or something like this, right? There's precedent in our courts to be able to bring a defamation case and so on and so forth, right? There's precedent for how you can handle that. Now, enforcing those and getting those through the courts is a whole other thing, but it's very different, that kind of interaction model, versus if you think about, I am now going into someone's thread. This person posted a post. I'm going into their territory. I'm going into their comments, right? Or they posted something and now I'm going after them. I'm kind of chasing them or harassing them online, right? That harassing kind of behavior. It's a very different behavior. Now I'm going into your space, right? But if you post something in your space and you're not tagging someone in the post, I think that should be looked at differently than I'm going into your thread and I'm commenting profusely or commenting hateful things or these kinds of things. Those are two very different types of behaviors. Similarly, right, if you are just kind of yelling on the street or causing a commotion versus kind of going up to someone in their face and really kind of trying to directly go after someone. Kind of the digital equivalent of that is you're tagging them directly in a post, or you're going into their comment thread, you're specifically going after people. Similarly, with the idea of posting people's personal information, you have this whole idea of doxing on the internet where you're posting people's information. You're really trying to personally harm someone or post their personal information and that kind of direct harassing type of behavior. How should we think about those things? How should we start thinking about these different interaction models in the context of content platform monopolies? We have not had a public discourse around that. We have not had a dialogue that says, this is appropriate or this is inappropriate. Or you know what? I don't agree with this information. But we don't want to find ourselves in a position where online free speech is now considered a luxury as opposed to a right. And the latter is what should be true in this country. And that's what this country was built on. And now it's a stretch, right? Because there isn't total free speech. Even rewind the clock like 30 years ago, pre the internet, pre-content platforms, all this stuff. You don't have total free speech in the sense that you can't go into the movie theater and yell fire. But there's a public discourse around where are the boundaries, right? What is appropriate? What is inappropriate? We haven't had that. Now, in order to have that conversation, you got to narrow the conversation because you can't just have that holistically and say every content platform needs to follow these rules. Because what you will do if you make every content platform follow some set of rules is now you're also going to clamp down on the ability for them to compete. So what you've seen is when Reddit bans these communities have now gone and created their own apps or their own little sites, like this Parler app, right? That's great because now you have this competition. You have these smaller communities that are still popping up and the conversation can continue itself, right? So you want that to happen. If you now make rules that have to be applied to the smaller content platform startups, it will be so restrictive for those startups to comply with the rules that you're actually just benefiting the tech monopolies. We've seen this with the GDPR laws that they've passed in Europe, where those laws are applying to all businesses. And we've said before, Facebook and Google should be kissing the feet of the EU legislators because those tech monopolies have the most resources and the best data and the tools to comply with those laws the best. So it actually puts such a prohibitive kind of anti-competitive restraint on smaller companies that are trying to build their business and use resources just to build their business. Now they also have to make all these investments and comply with all these rules. And so it hurts the kind of startup, the competitive dynamic in the ecosystem. So when we talk about rules or when we talk about regulation, it's very different when it's about the monopoly versus smaller non-monopoly private companies. So if you focus the conversation around that, now we can start to have a debate about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. And I would love to hear from all of you about what are the kinds of behaviors, what are the kinds of interaction models on these monopoly content platforms that you think are appropriate or inappropriate, even if the content is fake, blatantly fake, even if the content, you know what, is harmful or offensive. Should it still be online? And the problem is, if you don't think it should be online, who should determine what's appropriate and inappropriate? And will you ever be able to find the right balance of appropriate or inappropriate? And the answer is no. You'll never be able to find the right balance. And so that's what is the beauty of the American Republic and these civil liberties that we provide to our residents and our citizens, right? So now how does that map to these content platform monopolies? We need to have that conversation. There needs to be a discourse as opposed to systemic initiatives to put pressure, immense pressure. These things don't happen by accident. These are coordinated initiatives to put pressure on the Facebooks of the world, on the Googles of the world, and to have them comply. But who are they to figure out what's appropriate or inappropriate? That's the conversation we need to have as a country, as a free society, as a legislature, as the judiciary branch. And we haven't had that discourse yet. So I would love to hear from you all about what you think is that right balance. If we narrow the conversation on these content platform monopolies on the Facebook and Googles, not everyone, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. And the beauty of this, by the way, is once you hit monopoly status, we want to have competition. So once you hit monopoly status, if you have to comply with these rules, by the way, will hurt your business. We're seeing it in broad daylight, right? It's the more curated content platforms that are able to appeal to their users better, are able to kind of create that cleaner type of ecosystem. We see this in the book. We talk about this in the book, right? You need curation. So what you're saying is, hey, you're a monopoly. You know what? Facebook had $70 billion in revenue and $19 billion in net income. Those margins are crazy. That's called monopoly money. So once you hit monopoly status, how do you help make other tech startups competitive? And the answer is, if you have regulation or if you have policies that the content platform monopolies have to follow, and the smaller tech startups, and I'm including a Reddit and a Twitter in that, as well as these smaller ones like a Parler, don't have to follow, that by definition is helping to even the playing field between the content platform monopolies, which are going to have a less curated environment, a more dilutive environment, a more, say, potentially offensive or harmful environment. And so that means that advertisers might be less willing to advertise there, and users might be less attractive to engage there. But again, that's now a kind of forcing function to help even the playing field between the monopoly content platforms and the up and coming content platforms. So that's kind of what I like about treating and drawing this line in the sand. And none of what's going on right now has really drawn that line in the sand. Everyone needs to comply by the same rules. And if you don't comply by the same rules, you're wrong and horrible, and all your advertisers are going to boycott you. But when you do have that line in the sand, and we do think about monopolies differently than everyone else, you can start to have a more focused and nuanced conversation about what's appropriate or inappropriate. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.